Good morning. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Right. Good morning to everyone. I see we have a nice large number of attendees now, so good morning and welcome to day 2 of the IFSF Virtual 2020 conference. I am Heather Price. I'm the chair of the International Forecourt Standards Forum, and I'm also the moderator for this year's conference. So my first job and my main job as moderator is pleased to remind people to open the chat box on their Zoom, on the Zoom screen, which is at the bottom, and to use the chat box to either have a discussion during the presentation about some of the things that are going on, but also to write down any questions that you have for Greg, and I will be asking that of Greg and other speakers as we at the end of each session in the Q&A. Right, so before we go any further, I'd just also like to remind you about the schedule, which hopefully you saw on the, the revolving slides before the start of the session. But this afternoon we have a couple of technical sessions. So we have John Carrier and David Ezel, who will be talking about the GitLab repository and some of the tools that IFSF and Connexus have developed between us. And then following that is a session for technical associates or anyone who might be interested in joining as a technical associate to talk with Nick Allen and Mirko Spagnolati about what IFSF can do to improve what we do for you. But this morning I have 2 very exciting speakers. They will be talking about our theme, which is enhancing consumer experience from 2 different perspectives. So we have Peter Van Now in an hour's time from a supplier perspective, but talking to us now is Greg McAuliffe, and Greg is the head of IT at CERTAS Energy Retail. So welcome, Greg, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks to the IFSF for inviting me to speak here today. There were some very interesting discussions on Tuesday, so hopefully I'll be able to follow in that theme of keeping everybody engaged and interested. So what I'd like to talk to you this morning about is everyone's talking about the digitalisation of the forecourt and how we're moving forward and using technology and all these new weird and wonderful technologies that are at our disposals. I'd like to take you through our journey through that process and highlight some of the challenges that we've come up against over the past 5 or 6 years since I've been with the company. So I'm going to start by sorry, I'm having an issue with the slides here. So I'm just going to move on to a little bit about our company. So CERTAS Energy is part of the DCC organization. DCC has 4 key areas of interest, one of which is retail and oil. Around 2015, 2016, DCC and CERTAS Energy went on a significant run of acquisitions, starting in France, where we acquired the SO Express network from Exxon, around 300 or so sites, quickly followed by a Shell network in Denmark, and followed again by another 140 sites in 2017 from Exxon. The thing that the nature of these acquisitions is, and they're always the same, there's a similar thing to them. So the first period where you acquire such a large group of assets is there's a period of stabilization where you have to keep the lights on, the business running as usual. Then you go through a period of integration where you may already have some services that are duplicated as a result of the acquisition. And that's where you go through this period of integration where you're consolidating both these networks into your own environment. So we spent about 2 years doing that. So we emerged in 2018 at a point in time where we were looking to the industry to see what was a hot topic, and very much at the time was the concept of digitalisation, big data, cloud, and so on. In fact, that's not a new topic. Those of you who go to Unity, the big trade show in Stuttgart, every 2 years, I think in 2016, they were talking about cloud. That was a hot topic then. Roll on 2 years later into 2018, and a hot topic at Unity was data, big data. So things were moving in the industry around getting more information, moving the technology to the cloud. Now we looked for inputs on CERTAS Retail, looked for inputs and looked to see what the industry were doing, and we found an interesting survey done by Accenture in that year. Now I'm not going to go through the entire survey or anything like that, but they brought up some very interesting key points which sort of fed into our digital strategy. They identified 4 key disruptors, and there's an old saying, it's teaching grandma to suck eggs, and what that means for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's teaching people what they already know. So if you're aware of these strategies and these trends, I apologize, but so this is our experience. So Accenture identified 4 key disruptors. Customers will no longer buy fuel. Well, that's pretty well known to all of us. Customers will no longer own or maintain a car. Connected cars will enable new services, and competition will grow as the fuel suppliers and those services are diminishing. There are 5 key trends that the rate of this disruption is accelerating. Digital investments are expected to increase. Availability of BI and analytics will drive a lot of our performance improvements, and we're all working towards a digital maturity. Now, again, this is the teaching people to suck eggs bit. This was written back in 2018, and to a lot of you, you probably identify or you can empathize with a lot of those key trends. In fact, 2018, I think in 2020, I don't think we've moved on significantly. We still are looking at these trends. I think the digital investment area is still increasing. Certainly at CERTAS Retail, we've been diving very deeply into the area of analytics and BI. So there was a few recommendations came out of this, and this was really born out of that survey, where Accenture recommending we use data to better understand our customers and our environment, create an ecosystem, a digital ecosystem, and drive the digital innovation holistically across the business. So what that means is that we're going to touch every area of our business with digital innovation, digital improvements, new skills, and so on. Now, I'll change tack a little bit and talk about the DCC, or the CERTAS Retail model. We are very much interested in the world of unmanned forecourts. We do have manned forecourts on our network, but certainly we see the unmanned forecourt as a big area of opportunity for us. On the plus side of the unmanned forecourts, there's obviously there's increased convenience. Customers like the ability just to go onto a forecourt, fill and drive off. They very appreciative of a lower price point. However, interestingly, we did a survey earlier this year when we were opening a new network here in Ireland, and we found that actually price was only a key driver to 30% of the market. Increased convenience was of more interested. Figures are up around 40%, which was quite interesting. But of course, with any sort of upside, there's a downside. And in the unmanned world, there are a number of key challenges. One of which is in the unmanned environment, we have very limited interaction with our customer. we have as a result of that interaction or limited interaction, we've very little knowledge of that customer, what they want, what they're looking for. Again, being unmanned, there's a very limited product range, so we're there to sell fuel. As I said, we're not operating C stores. It's really around fuel purchasing. And we're noticing in certain countries where the unmanned concept is relatively new, there's certainly a mindset change that we're grappling with, where people are used to going to a forecourt, but also not only buying fuel, but going into the store and buying a newspaper or whatever it may be. So that mindset change from a manned environment to an unmanned environment is a significant one. So while we're grappling with all of these challenges, we're still trying to maintain our customer loyalty and maintain a level of convenience, which is why they come to us in the first place. We want to preserve that relationship with the customer to keep them coming back. But of course, that's a challenge when you don't know who your customers are, when you have limited interaction. But all of these bumps in the road, I'll call them, or challenges, are all on our path to digitalisation. Now, if we take a look back, our journey back, which started back in 2015, 2016, we thought that the big area of the forecourt was obviously the forecourt controller, and it still is today. So without that, you have very little. Linked to that, so you've got a few key metrics that we're interested at that time. So we were very interested in what our sales were. We needed to know how much fuel we were selling. We were very interested to know our pricing strategy, how much are we selling and at what price. And of course, what stock we have on the forecourt at any one time. So these were our three data sets that we looked at back in 2016, and they became our world. That's how we built our unmanned environment, and they were our key inputs to driving our business. How much we were selling, at what price, how much stock we had on the site. But of course, it's not only about forecourt control, that has to feed into some sort of a point of sale or back office, which of course then is feeding your reporting environment. That could be daily, hourly, weekly, whatever it might be. So that's the environment that we came to know and love over the last 3 or 4, or over the early years of our journey. But move on to today, and this is what we have today. And I don't think this is untypical of what you all have on for those of you who are retailing. This is not unusual in your environments now. So we still have the 3 core tenets of price, stock, and sales. But our sales, how are we selling? So we need to increase the methods of payment, whether it be fuel card, bank card, mobile payments, and so on. We still have our POS and our reporting suite, but we've gone beyond reporting. We're now feeding our business intelligence platforms and making decisions based on what we're seeing on the sites. There are increased compliance and security aspects to all of this. On the stock side, not only are we just interested in stock at a point in time, but that's feeding a wet stock management system. We're looking at gains and losses and potential leaks and all sorts of other metrics that go beyond simply understanding what your stock position is. On the pricing side, we can send a static price down to the forecourt, but how do we attract customers? Well, that probably has to feed into some sort of a loyalty or discounting infrastructure. If you have a loyalty infrastructure, then you need some form of user registration. You need to get to know your customer. And once you know your customer, you can offer them other services or discounted services like car wash or VAC or EV or whatever it may be. And then, of course, we're interested in the green agenda, in our carbon footprint, and promoting other green initiatives like we've begun to put solar panels on our canopies. So what I'm hoping you're getting from this is that all of these systems are not unusual in your forecourt today, and this is just the unmanned environment. Obviously, in a C-store environment, you've got even more interfaces. The key thing here is that all of these are data points, and all of these need to talk to each other at some level. And this was the challenge for us, and has been and continues to be. So we identified 4 key challenges or pitfalls that we found in this digital environment. So the first one is we have multiple or inconsistent data formats. So we're getting data often in a variety of formats. It could be text file, it could be email, it could be an XLS file, it could be a PDF. We're getting it in a very inconsistent way. So we might be getting it hourly, we might be getting it twice a day, we might be getting it daily. Because it's proprietary, often there are no standards associated with the data format. That leads to all sorts of challenges. Sometimes we find that some of this data is hard coded within the systems, so it's very difficult to change the format of the data or to add new characterizations into it. We were finding that we're missing or incorrect master data, particularly on the wet stock management side. So with an example of that would be if you're looking at a tank capacity and you have stock in it and you're calculating your ullage, are you calculating your ullage against the theoretical capacity or the operational capacity, and which system is using what figure? The next area, and this is one that this is around proprietary tools. I like to call this my Unity experience, and I'm just wondering, have any of you gone to a trade show like Unity or NACS or whatever it may be, and you go into the hall and you see there are these wonderful plasma screens showing you the latest, greatest tools that at a click of a button will create an alert and will send that ticket to a help desk, and an engineer will be dispatched to site, or an alert goes off and it triggers some other action. And you think that is just brilliant. That is the panacea to all my management needs. But then you delve a little deeper and you find that, well, it only works on certain dispensers or certain pauses or certain tank gauges or whatever it may be. So the software itself may cost you a few €1,000 to procure, but it might cost you $1 million or so in actually getting it to work with the environment that you already have. The next area or challenge that we found is the area, it's a concept that I have in my own head, and I describe it as a data island. So a data island to me is where data has come from one of these proprietary systems, and it's very difficult to get out. So it's kind of stranded there. So yes, there's a lot of useful data in there, but how do you get it out of there? How do you use it? And it becomes very difficult to work with, and it prevents sort of a holistic view of what's going on in your network. And then the last challenge that we have, and it's more of a result of a good process. So things have moved on. There are multiple apps doing multiple things, and particularly in the mobile world. And we've all seen this. So you buy any sort of a service, or you have a service on your network. It could be car wash, it could be loyalty, it could be pricing. But there's an app for it. There's an app for every one of it, every one of those separate tools. But me as a customer, do I want to have 3 or 4 different apps to use an unmanned forecourt? Almost certainly not. So having these multiple apps, although it's absolutely the right thing to do because they could be used in isolation, they have to be structured in a way that the data can be shared to other platforms. User registration would be a good example of that. So I'm going to, for those of you that were on the call in the conference on Tuesday, Ian Brown told a lovely story of the evolution of woolly mammoths to APIs. I'm also going to step back in history, but not as far as the woolly mammoths. So where I'm talking about lack of standardization and lack of connectivity and data sharing between systems, this is nothing new. So back in the early 70s, 80s, there was a need to standardize how computer systems interoperated. Systems were being developed by different manufacturers that were proprietary to that environment. So the ISO developed what they called at the time the OSI 7-layer model. And this model was designed to define how various layers of your IT infrastructure should interact. Now, it's been incredibly successful, and those of you who are as old as I am might remember it, but those of you youngsters out there probably don't recall this. But it's so successful that we probably don't even think of it today. Now, I won't go through it in too much detail, but just to illustrate the point, I just want to call out some key points from it. So they split it out into 7 layers, and at the very bottom you had the physical layer, and the physical layer was all about plugs and voltages and how things would physically fit together. And so you could, today we refer to such things as network cables. And give me a network cable. A network cable is actually an RJ45 with a Cat6 twisted pair. Now, nobody says that anymore. They just think of a network cable. The next layer up is, how do these network cables and connection points hook together? Well, they hook together into some form of a bridge or a switch or a router. Now, everyone knows has heard of the term of a router, may not necessarily know what it is, but you hear it in Hollywood movies. Moving on from that, you move up to the next layer and you talk about IP. And again, Hollywood movies, you hear about what's his IP address. And we don't even think about these things anymore. They just happen. But now we're getting further up into the layers. So the bottom 4 layers of the transport, the network, the data link, and the physical layers, they're very, very much taken for granted. So these things work, they're hooked together. But as we get into 5, 6, and 7, this is where things become a little bit more gray. So although at the layer 5, this determines how all of these networks interact, how they frame their packets, how they share information, and so on. And you'll notice that APIs are appearing in there. So the concept of APIs isn't necessarily anything new. It's been around for quite some time. And then the top 2 layers, where we in CERTAS Retail really struggled with, is we've received the data in various ways and means up to layer 5, but then what do we do with it? And often the data is presented in a particular way that is unique to that supplier. Up at layer 7, you have application layers. And in the old days, that used to be a thick client that you would install. Nowadays, thankfully, it's moved on to a browser-based layer. But what we've tried to do is we found that at these upper layers, things became less gray, a little bit more proprietary. People were doing their own thing. Now, the thing that I like about the 7-layer model, and the reason I bring it up today, is I think it aligns very nicely with the IFSF strategy in terms of trying to standardize the entire forecourt experience. And you could overlay this with, down at the physical layer, it could be pumps, dispensers, piping, whatever it may be, all the way up to the IT world. But for me, this 7-layer model is a key enabler for any sort of a digital ecosystem. So what is a digital ecosystem? Which again, jumping back to the Accenture model, our recommendation is something that they're encouraging you to do. Now, a digital ecosystem, it doesn't have to be overly technical, but a few of the characteristics are, it's going to be cloud-based. Generally, it's going to be cloud-based. It doesn't have to be, but it's much easier to do it that way. Nobody wants to have servers in their buildings anymore, building data centers and so on, where there are multiple providers out there that can host all of that for you. Generally, these environments are standards based and they're open, so they will interface with any sort of supplier or manufacturer and so on. They're secured, they're managed, and they're compliant. So otherwise, they wouldn't be able to exist. But key to your ecosystem is you have to build partnerships with suppliers. Now, you already have a supplier base, but I'm talking about new suppliers, suppliers that you wouldn't necessarily have dealt with before. And they could be marketing teams, they could be firewall consultants, they could be API specialists. What I'm saying here is that look away from your standard supplier base, which may have been those engaged specifically with Forecourt, but look into new areas and who can give you new services like business intelligence. And of course, it has to be scalable. You can't just build it and not have scalability in mind. So the approach that we took is, well, where do we start? So we came up with this 3-tiered approach. So at tier 3, this is very much around the forecourt. And when I say a 3-tiered approach, it's where are the data sets in our environment? Where are we getting the data from? So at tier 3, this is very much around the forecourt. This is around your ATGs and your POSs and your probes and your pumps and all of that kind of thing. And there's going to be multiples of these. And if you have a 1,000-site network, you're going to have thousands and thousands of these data points. At tier 2, then you have what I would call network layer data points. And typically you have one of these per track. So you might have one tool that's looking after alerting, another tool that's looking after loyalty, another one that might be looking after wet stock management. But all of these are data points that is taking information from tier 3 below it. And then at the top of the tree, we have tier 1. And the key characteristic of this is generally you only have one of these in your organization. And this could be your ERP environment, your head office suite, your BI suite, whatever it may be, but you generally only have one. So we looked at this model and we thought, well, where do our opportunities lie? So as I mentioned before, if you look at this 3-tier model, down at tier 3, the more sites you're adding, the data points are increasing exponentially. Tier 1 is very difficult to replicate, and you probably don't want to anyway. So we very much focused on tier 2. So what is happening at tier 2? Because generally at tier 2, you only have one of them per track. As I said, it could be a loyalty engine, it could be a pricing engine, it could be a wet stock management. And we looked at that and we said, do we have any data islands at that point? Isolated pieces of data that are just sitting at that level that we're struggling to get the information out of. And we looked at, well, what could benefit from communicating with what? Is there a case of, now I've suggested that the communication may be via API, but it could be by anything. But this at layer 2, we consider just creating these relationships, and that's what we did. We created relationships at tier 2 where we were trying to consolidate data from other data points to give us new information. So we were taking data from, say, our point of sale to give us increased reporting. I'm going to just throw out an example of this just to illustrate the point. So if we have an e-receipting portal, right? So on your network, you want to offer e-receipts. So you're going to, at tier 3, you're going to offer that capability on the site. But at tier 2, you're going to have some form of a registration where users sign up for that. If people are signing up for your loyalty, they'll do that at a site level. But equally, you're going to have some form of registration. And at car wash, you have something similar going on. So you can see what's happening here. You're getting data duplication at tier 2. You're getting the same user registration information all the time. But could there be a benefit of telling your car wash registered users about the loyalty solution, or inviting your offering e-receipts to your customers by offering them a chance to sign up to your car wash? So this is where your opportunities, I feel, will lie to increase your levels of integration and data sharing. So I would sum it up with these 6 areas in what we did. So we reviewed our digital hierarchy. We looked at our tiers 1, 2, and 3. We moved towards creating our own layers 6 and 7. And what I mean by that is that we just said to our suppliers, just give us the data and we'll present it on format in our own way. That didn't mean that we had to do a whole lot of development. At layer 7, we were using, you use your browser or whatever. So it's really, the key for us is just getting hold of that data. Once we had the data, we could then work with it. But that brings us on to point 3. So getting direct access to that layer 5, that's key for me and for anyone looking to go on a digital journey. Data is key to everything. It's not that it doesn't exist. It's just the ability to get at it. The next thing I would say is partner with suppliers that promote using open standards. So that's not to say don't use people or suppliers that are very proprietary based, but because you can still work with them, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking to build new relationships, do it with those that are open and willing to implement standards. Take a holistic view. So look at the data in another way, and I'll give you an example of that very shortly. And then finally, what I would say, operationalize staff. So you may have to retrain staff to look at data in a different way. So you may have an operational person who is looking at alerts or emails or various other identifiers that are coming from retail sites. We had to train our staff to look at the data in a slightly different way, and I'll go through that in a couple of these examples. So this was one example that we found was quite interesting. So it's a very simple graph. There's a red line and a blue line. The red line is a moving 6-week average. So on one axis, you have the number of transactions that are happening on the network at any point in time. And on the bottom axis, you have what time of day those transactions are. So we can see that around between 9 in the morning and 12, we have a peak in transactions, a dip around lunchtime, and then a slightly more flatter peak, I suppose, in the afternoon. So that's what that particular network looks like. So that is presenting all the transactions from a network over an average of a 6-week period. The blue line is telling us what's happening today. So how is our network performing today versus the 6-week moving average? And you can see around 9 or 10 in the evening, it's beginning to trail off a little bit, but you can see the shape of the graph is pretty similar. Now, if there was a big divergence between the red and the blue line, that would prompt you to ask questions and to investigate a little bit further. Now, stress, this is looking at, this is our network in France, and this is taking a holistic view of 300 sites over a 6-week period. But you can see what's happening today is pretty much in line with what's happened before. What would you expect the data source of that to be? Well, traditionally it could come from your POS or your back office, or maybe your card authorization platform, or your ERP or your head office infrastructure. In fact, that's exactly where this is coming from. It's our head office infrastructure. So it's nothing unusual for that. As I say, we're presenting this at a network level. Well, we do this also at a site level, where we can just look at the trends to see what's actually causing these dips. And it could be something technical, but it could be that somebody has parked a truck in front of the entrance to our unmanned forecourt and we didn't know. Here's another example. So this graph is showing us sites that have long transaction times. So a transaction that is longer than 420 seconds. So what's that, 7 minutes or so, which would be unusual. So in an unmanned environment, a transaction that lasts 7 minutes, that's quite unusual. There's something not quite right there. So that could be an indication. So this site right at the top, Saint Etienne, that's had 48 transactions on this particular day that are longer than 7 minutes. Now that it could be caused by anything, but in this case, we're pretty sure it's caused by potential filter issues on the pump. Now you would expect to get that sort of information from a wet stock management system, but in fact we're getting that information from a POS, because the POS is recording the start and end time of the transaction. So I hope this is illustrating to you how you can use data that you already have to give you insights into different areas. So who would have thought of using the POS as a wet stock management tool to monitor the performance of your filters? And we've multiple examples of that. So the key point that I'm saying here is just use the data in a different way. So in summary, just as we had our pitfalls, I would say to you, these are our recommendations. So first, understand where your opportunities lie. Do that exercise of looking at your 3-tier model. Understand your data sources. Understand if whatever changes you're going to make, whether it be at tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, they need to be economically viable. Take a standards-based holistic view, so try and conform as much as possible to a standard. Try and create a digital environment. So start talking to the larger environment providers like in Azure, like in AWS, because they're going to solve a lot of your compliance issues as well around security, which may bring in such areas as PCI and GDPR. But also validate a lot of your master data. So look at the master data that you're getting from the site. Is it, to use an earlier example, is it theoretical capacity? Is it operational capacity? And then finally, look at building new relevant partnerships. So go beyond your traditional partnerships that you have today and start talking to other providers that may be able to help you out at those higher layers at 5, 6, and 7. So that's all I have for you today. I'm going to hand it back to Heather. I hope you found it interesting. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Greg. I wish I could get the proper applause that you deserve, and maybe next year we can persuade you to come to our conference if it's when it's a face-to-face. Let's be very positive here. Let's hope we're in Prague next year. I do have some questions for you from the chat box. So if you don't mind answering a few questions. So first of all, Don Williams asked, how does asset management fit into this model? How do you track and improve asset downtime and make asset replacement decisions?
Well, I'm going to put my IT hat on there. So if we're talking about assets, how do you communicate with them at an IT level? So in the IT world, you have various protocols available to you. Various asset management tools, all working on SNMP. There are ping tools. There are all sorts of tools that will do that for you. There are other, say, physical asset management tools that you can layer on top of that, and there are solutions out there. It involves there's IoT devices or IoT plugins that you can associate with these assets. The key enabler there is tagging the asset with whatever tool is available, and it really depends on the asset. But once you have that network accessible, once you get it into that 7-layer model at whatever level, you then are able to pull the data from it.
Okay, and I should also say John Carrier, who is our project manager, did put in the box to say to you that 15 years ago he implemented transaction duration measuring to detect block filters using REMC, which is one of our standards, which is remote equipment accessing. So just so you know,
he beat us to it
by 15 years. Hey.
Yeah.
And actually there is a question from John, who I'm sure is desperate to be able to ask you himself, and maybe we'll have to introduce you after the session, where he says, do you build your own value added applications or work with one supplier or multiple suppliers?
It depends on what layer. So the inputs, we're working with many suppliers, so who can give us the data. Once we get it up to the BI layer, so layer 6 and 7, we work with specific providers. We have a group that are purely engaged in BI, business intelligence, and translating that data, that raw data, into something more meaningful. Funnily enough, they're not involved in the forecourt industry in any shape or form. They're completely unfamiliar to it. They were just interested in getting the right data, or getting the data into a right format, and then we would advise them the presentation that we needed from it. It's a combination. So a lot of our model is very much an outsourced model. So we have BI, and we have a BI manager in-house who has all of these great ideas on what to do with the data. But then we have a team of outsourced specialists who will actually work with that data and present it in the tools that we already have.
Okay, now the questions are coming in thick and fast. So a quick one here from Kevin Fu, who says, are there any other data points that would be good to have but unavailable or unused right now? For example, weather at site, road traffic devices that respond to beacons, etc. And how would you use these data points you've made available? Sorry, it's a multiple question.
Yes, and it's a very good question. It's something that I was working on a car wash project in Ireland this summer, and we had all the right metrics, you know, the uptime, downtime, all that kind of stuff. And I said to the BI manager, how are we going to measure weather? And he said, that's easy. There are APIs out there for that as well, that you can pull those data sources in there. I'm pretty sure, Kevin, that the information is out there. You'll find somebody somewhere doing these weird and wonderful things with data. It's there. It's just a matter of finding them. I hope that answers your question. I'm reasonably confident that the data is there. That weather component influencing car wash sales, that was a key one for me. I thought we were really going to struggle with it, and the BI manager just said, that's easy. We just go to these guys and get the data. It's out there.
Okay, I just remember talking about rain fade when it impacted our ability to accept card transactions. Rain fade was a famous one in Exxon when I was there. A quick one, sorry, they're coming in fast. I'll try and maybe limit it to two more. Francois Mezina, who's our president, says, what are the key success factors for quickly managing digital transformation?
I think for us, it's the metrics are definitely within the business. And you'll see, and it's really around the performance of the area that you're measuring. So it could be your wet stock management. Do you have better data? When we first started out, we were having stock wreck issues, 5,000-6,000 liters. Now we're down to the levels that you would expect to be around sort of 10, 15, that sort of level. Now that wasn't with an off-the-shelf stock analysis tool. That was just using the raw data and correcting the master data from the sites. It really comes down to, it's difficult to measure, but certainly we're seeing on the operational side, we had people that they would send reports every day of sites that were down. They didn't know why they were down, so they didn't know what the remediation point was. Now they have a much better idea, because the initial trigger that we would see in the previous slide where I showed you a potential block filter, that's a trigger for them to go and check the wet stock management system, or to send an engineer to site. It may not be the right action, but it just means that an issue is looked at much faster than it would have been before. So it's a difficult one. I think in summary, you will see your KPIs in various areas of your business improve as you get better at data.
Okay, so I'm maybe trying to squeeze two more in because they keep coming. So Parag Shah says, have you considered developing a CERTAS mobile app and leverage for all your brands to get closer to your customer and offer the same experience for transacting with you?
Yes, we have, very much so. And we're being honest, we struggle with it because there are so many data points. What do people want in an app? Do they want loyalty? Do they want discounting? Do they want do they want to use it as a method of payment? Do they want e-receipting? And we went down this journey and we just found there was just so many data points feeding into it. So we've taken a step back and we're going to build it up in a much more granular fashion, which we'll be releasing early next year. But we're designing it in such a way that we can add on those additional services. We'll probably start with something like enticing people onto our forecourts with discounts for which you have to sign up. And then we'll start, once we have that user registration where we know who the customer is and their spending habits are, we can then offer additional services such as car wash. But I think what we found was we were very much in danger of just diving in, trying to develop this app that was going to solve all our issues in one step. But we've taken it, we're actually being a lot more cautious now. We're just going to look at discounting and then gradually grow it. But the app is going to be structured in such a way that it is scalable, it is growable. You can add in additional services without having to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel. Okay.
All right, this will be the last question, I promise, but Ian's asked two, so I'm going to ask one of his. So this is, oh, actually they're from two different Ian Browns, sorry. So one of you won't get the question. Interesting examples of different data sources giving unexpected insights. What limits your business in doing this? Is it getting the data or joining it together, or is it just imagining what can be done?
It's getting the data. We don't have an issue joining it together because we're getting it in multiple formats today already. We're getting it in CSVs and text files and XMLs and all of that kind of stuff. No issue with that at all, because people do that. They do that for a living. It's getting the data. It's purely getting the data from whatever system is generating it, be it an ATG, be it a POS, be it a wet stock management system. It's getting the data. That step at layer 5 is critical. You get your hands on the data. Once you have it, you can do whatever you want with it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Greg. I'm going to have to stop now, otherwise the questions will keep on coming. But, you know, thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule and coming and talking to us today. Thank you very much to the people who asked all the questions as well. And I will let you now, Greg, go away, but remind everyone else, and Greg, maybe you'll hang around for the next session, which is with Peter Van Now from Dover Fueling Systems. And I know you know Peter very well. And Peter will be starting in 13 minutes, which is at 10 o'clock GMT or 11 o'clock CET.